bachelor's in mechanical engineering from LSU and an MBA from Harvard Business School. He also earned a doctorate in higher education management with distinction for dissertation from the University of Pennsylvania, where his research focused on linkage between higher education and the labor market in the United States. Also, we have Jay Stegmeyer, president of GAO Strategies and the former Chesterfield County Administrator. Jay Stegmeyer retired from Chesterfield County in 2016 after serving for 37 years, including 9 as County Administrator. He earned a master's degree in public administration from the University of Virginia, was an ICMA credentialed manager, and has served on numerous regional, corporate, and nonprofit boards. In 2016, Jay was recognized with a Lifetime Achievement Award by the Richmond Times-Dispatch for contributions to the Richmond region. Today, he provides private companies, local governments, nonprofits, universities, and individuals with strategies and leadership guidance. At this time, we'll get Stephen Moret to come forward.
Well, good afternoon. It's great to have an opportunity to visit with you all. It's great to be back at the homestead. One of the things that my wife and I were excited about when we were thinking about taking this job in Virginia was getting the chance to actually live in Virginia again. We lived in Arlington many years ago, and we used to vacation here and also at Williamsburg and other spots in the Commonwealth, so it's great to be back. I am about 10 and a half months into my job, so I'm still a little green, but I've learned a lot this year, and I've really enjoyed getting to know many of the VACO members across the Commonwealth. Today I'm going to give you an overview of VDP. I know for some of you, you're very familiar with it, some of you may not be. I want to talk a little bit about where we're going in the future and how we're going to get there. I know there's some interest in GO Virginia and how we're working with them, how we work with localities and so forth. And also I'll briefly mention the JLARC work that we've been doing this year toward the end. I really look forward to your questions and the dialogue. When I put together these slides, you always have to make a decision between kind of how much to share and how fast to talk. I decided I'm going to talk fast because I want to share a lot. I hope that's okay. I apologize for the font on this slide, but if you think about VDP, what are we fundamentally? VDP is the State Economic Development Authority for the Commonwealth of Virginia. We have about 115 employees. There certainly are many other groups that are involved in economic development, but to the extent that there's one that's kind of the overall lead, it's roughly VDP. The most important thing that I wanted to highlight in this slide is that we do our work largely through interacting with partners across the Commonwealth of Virginia. There's kind of 4 core functions of the organization. Those are kind of the quadrants you see there. Business development is probably the one you're most familiar with, marketing, lead generation, business recruitment, and so forth, incentives administration. But there are 3 other very important functions. Product development, where we help localities develop sites, identify sites, develop sites. Economic competitiveness issues that we do in combination or in collaboration with the General Assembly. We also do workforce development. We have the Virginia Jobs Investment Partnership there. We do a variety of work with our regional workforce boards, with our higher education institutions. And finally, international trade development, where we have one of the best international trade promotion groups in the country. So those are really the core key functions. As you look around that box, you'll see they're listed as many other organizations, localities and local economic developers, state departments, higher education institutions, and so forth. The work that we do, we really do in partnership with all of you. And so you are not only one of our customers, but really an important partner in the work that we do. Of course, we also work through the regional EDOs across the Commonwealth. Most of Virginia, most of the 133 localities are partnered with a regional economic development organization. They're also key partners for us as well. I began this year, one of the things that was very clear to me when I was interviewing to be the CEO of EDP is the incredible diversity of the Commonwealth of Virginia. It's very clear, this is probably true of any state, but it's especially true of Virginia, and that is that the Commonwealth is not one homogeneous integrated economy. It's really a collection of very distinct and diverse regional economies. So I started off spending a lot of time across Virginia. This was actually just the first round I've been to most of the regions at least 3 times, actually, since I started back in January. Plan to do that regularly as we go forward in the future. One of the big questions that I posed again and again was, what are the aspirations that we should be pursuing? What are the goals that we should be setting as a Commonwealth and as a state economic development authority? I asked this question of localities, of local and regional economic development organizations, business people, leaders of the General Assembly, and so forth. And ultimately, we came up with 5 things that really there's a tremendous amount of consensus about. I'll mention these briefly. One is to get our growth, our economic growth, back to the top 10. Virginia, in the wake of federal sequestration, went from being ranked roughly number 8 in the country for employment growth to being ranked number 36th in the country in the most recent 5-year period. That means less tax revenues for you all. That means fewer job opportunities. That means population out-migration. We want to get back to the top 10, and we want to get back to the top 10 in income growth as well, so the quality of jobs. The second goal, this is one I think that's particularly relevant to the folks in this room, and this is actually relatively unique in the country, is we have embraced the goal to help position every region of Virginia to get into positive territory. Those of you that have been here in Virginia a long time, which I know is most of you, you know that our growth is extremely uneven across the Commonwealth. In fact, back when Virginia 10 years ago was ranked the best state for business, Northern Virginia was actually more than 100% of all the growth of the Commonwealth of Virginia. That is to say that most of the rest of Virginia was actually losing jobs at the very time that we were hitting the top 10 for growth. That's not the kind of outcome that we want. We're not going to say that every region can grow at the same rate, but we do want to be working to ensure that we position every region to participate in growth, every region to be in positive territory. And that will have very substantial implications for how we do our work. Third, we want to get our business climate rankings back to the top. 10 years ago, Virginia was ranked literally the #1 position in most of the business climate rankings. You remember Forbes, CNBC, Polina, and so forth. Today, we average number 9 in the country. We're not in the top 3 in any of the rankings, and in all the perception-based rankings of states, we now rank outside the top 10. We rank between number 11 and number 15, behind states like Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, and Ohio, none of which I think should be higher than the Commonwealth. Number 4, we want to get VDP itself back to the top. In its first 10 years, it was certainly one of the very best in the country. It is one of the better state EDOs in the country, despite its failings, but we have a lot of room for improvement. We want to be the best in the country. And finally, we want to do all of that in a great spirit of partnership and collaboration with all of you and with all of our other economic development partners across Virginia. Those 5 goals, if you look at this slide, the 5 goals there are the same goals on the left. We surveyed all of our local, regional economic development partners across Virginia. Hundreds of folks took the survey. As you can see here, roughly 90% on average either strongly agreed, most strongly agreed, either strongly agreed or agreed with all those goals. Very few folks in opposition. There were a few folks in Northern Virginia that did not like the idea of every region participating in the growth of Virginia, but other than that, we had pretty good support across the Commonwealth. So those are really the goals. I should also say that those same goals were also embraced by leaders of the General Assembly. So we didn't interview literally every single General Assembly member, but we did interview the leaders of the money committees, the overall leadership of the Senate and the House. They also embraced these same 5 goals. So having the goals is great. The question is, how do you actually accomplish the goals, right? Well, we set about and laid out a process to determine what it would take to accomplish each of these goals. First, through a competitive process with GAO Virginia and with some of their support, we engaged McKinsey and IBM to help craft an economic growth strategy for Virginia and each of the regions of the Commonwealth. Second, that helped with both the first and the second goal. The second thing we did was to engage a number of our top rural stakeholders in Virginia. Folks like Tad Durisso with Mid-Atlantic Broadband, like Bill Shelton with DHCD, Christy Morton, who actually recently joined our staff as Vice President of External Affairs, David Hudgens with the Rural Electric Co-ops, and a variety of other folks, to really say what are the things that Virginia could do that we're not doing today that would help position our rural regions for growth. And I can talk about those later if you like. Third, we entered into a national rankings initiative where we partnered with the Virginia Chamber of Commerce and Virginia Tech to lay out exactly what it would take to get Virginia back to the top of the business climate rankings. Fourth, for VDP itself, we essentially assessed everything we do against our top national peers to identify what we could do to get better. It won't surprise you to know there was a long list of things we can do a lot better than we're doing today. And then finally, we work with our partners to develop new economic development protocols to better clarify how we do our work together. And I'll talk about more about that later on. So those are what we've laid out. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about each of those goals. First of all, that big goal, getting back to the top 10. I mentioned the first few years of this century, we were ranked in the top 10. The last 5 years, we ranked 36th in the country for employment growth, 46th in the country for income growth. We are really underperforming economically as a Commonwealth. This is overwhelmingly driven by federal sequestration, but nevertheless, it is what it is. The forecasts that are out there today, Moody's currently forecasts that Virginia will add an average of about 30,000 jobs a year over the next 10 years. Now that may seem like a big number in absolute sense, but that would rank us at the top of the bottom half of the states, number 28 in the country. To get into the top 10, we need to be more in the 75,000 jobs per year range. So literally 150% faster growth. This one slide is what has consumed me for the last 6 months and thinking about how can we go from an average of 30,000 a year to an average of 75,000 per year. That was also the challenge we put forth to McKinsey. And I'm sorry, the font on this slide is rather small, but what you're looking at is for the two most recent 5-year growth periods, 2006 to 11 on the left, 2011 to 2016 on the right. What was the growth rate in jobs? You remember before I said Northern Virginia in that previous period was actually more than 100% of all the growth. So if you look at the left-hand side, most of the regions are in negative territory, including Southwest Virginia, South Side, and some of the other rural regions of Virginia. More recently, we haven't been growing very quickly, but most of the regions are in positive territory. So when we think about the future of Virginia's economy, it's not just a question of how do we position Virginia as a whole for faster growth, but how do we position every region of Virginia to participate in that growth? Because the answers to those two questions are not the same. If we were just focused on growth, we would probably put the vast majority of our effort in 3 big metro areas and largely ignore the rest of the Commonwealth. That is not what we're going to do, at least as long as I'm at VDP. This slide here summarizes about 200 slides from a big piece of work that McKinsey and IBM did. The short answer they gave us is yes, it is possible for Virginia with all the great assets that you have and with your existing industry mix. You can get back into the top 10 and you can position every region to grow. Not necessarily every locality, mind you, but every region in positive territory. I can talk about the distinction later. They talked about 5 big growth sectors. The first one, the biggest one by far, is information technology. Not just cybersecurity, but also software development, onshore delivery centers, data centers, and so forth. That one sector could be as much as half of all of our traded sector employment growth in the Commonwealth the next 10 years. Second, leveraging the incredible asset that we have with the Port of Virginia, building a world-class transportation and logistics hub, not just in Hampton Roads, but really across the Commonwealth. Third, positioning our manufacturing sector to be future and growth ready. Think about food and beverage manufacturing, advanced materials, chemicals manufacturing, automotive, aerospace. Fourth, building on this great legacy that we already have with business services and corporate headquarters. That's a significant growth sector that we can cultivate, not just in the big metros, but in the rural regions of Virginia as well, particularly with big push IT opportunities. And finally, there were a number of sort of emerging targets that weren't huge in and of themselves, but that collectively could generate substantial growth. Think about unmanned systems, genomics, personalized medicine, and so forth. There's a lot more detail behind this, but those are the big target sectors. Every region of Virginia is competitive for at least 2 or 3 of these for different types of companies, not necessarily the exact same types of companies. For example, for IT, Northern Virginia versus rural Virginia, very different opportunities. But for those of you familiar with the CGI facility in Lebanon, Virginia, a great example that those types of projects can be successful in rural areas, and we think we can attract a lot more than to the Commonwealth. Now, one of the sobering things that McKinsey told us was, when you think about securing faster growth, it's not just about doing a better job of marketing and lead generation, although we do need to do a better job of both of those things, starting with having a marketing budget. That's a discussion for later. But we also have to work on the enablers. Virginia has great strengths in terms of human capital. We have high educational attainment. We've got a great higher education system, great public schools. But we are underperforming in producing some of the degrees that we most need. like, for example, computer science and related fields, like engineering, like skilled trades at the sub-baccalaureate level. This is holding back our growth. At the same time that we have a huge underemployment problem with college graduates in the Commonwealth. More than 1 out of 4 people in the Commonwealth of Virginia working full-time employed adults are not working in a college-level occupation. So it's a big issue in Virginia, and it's one of the things that's really driving a lot of the out-migration that we've been experiencing recently. So that's a big priority. And we also don't have custom workforce solutions in a statewide fashion. We need to address that as well. Site readiness is a huge issue. The most common reason that we lose a manufacturing project today, the most common reason, not workforce, not taxes, not logistics, is that we don't have a development-ready site available quickly enough to meet the company's needs. We're getting killed in sites with Tennessee, with South Carolina, with North Carolina, with Georgia and others. We've got to address that. The third one is building digital infrastructure. If we're going to be one of America's top growth states for information technology, we need to have ubiquitous broadband availability in the Commonwealth of Virginia. It's time for us to make that choice. It is not an impossible goal. We're not going to get there at $1 million a year, though. It's going to be a bigger investment. But it is an investment that we can afford to make and that would produce significant dividends for the Commonwealth of Virginia. We're hoping our next governor and General Assembly will embrace that as a goal to achieve over the next 5 to 7 years. And then finally, there's a number of cross-cutting initiatives, like creating a marketing budget. We're the only state I know of in America that markets itself for tourism, but not for every other industry sector. It's time that we realize we do need to tell our story. I don't think I forgot to put the slide in here, but I mentioned to you earlier, Virginia today, and literally every survey of business executives and site consultants, every single one, we do not rank in the top 10 anymore. We have fallen out of the top 10. And in some of those, we rank behind Mississippi, Alabama, Ohio, and other states that we should not rank behind. At the same time, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, all 5 of those states rank in the top 10 in all of those rankings and ahead of us in all of those rankings. I don't believe that that's mostly a substantive issue. I believe that we're not telling our story. Corporate America does not know what is here in the Commonwealth, and part of that is we're not spending anything on marketing today, so it's a big thing we've got to address. What would it mean if we were able to grow faster? Well, you know what it would mean for you. It would mean more tax revenues at the local level to fund all the things that you want to be able to fund, infrastructure, schools, and so forth. But it would also mean more economic opportunity. It would mean more sales for small businesses. More than 2/3 of the small businesses in the Commonwealth of Virginia and roughly 2/3 in each of your localities get all their sales locally. If the locality and the region and the state don't grow, they can't grow. The only way for them to grow is to take market share away from their competitors. That's not a great strategy. Well, it's a great strategy, but you also want the market to grow. Population and migration. We've had for the first time in many, many years, I don't know for sure if it's the first time ever, but certainly in decades, we have more people leaving Virginia for other states than moving into Virginia from other states. Now, it's not a huge outflow, but nevertheless, we've gone from strong in-migration to a meaningful amount of out-migration. Most of the people that are leaving the Commonwealth of Virginia have a bachelor's degree or higher. In fact, in the last year that I saw, 2015, I don't have the latest year in front of me, we had more people with a bachelor's degree move out of the Commonwealth of Virginia than we produced bachelor's degrees across all of higher education in the Commonwealth that year. It's a real issue, and it's mostly about economic opportunities. So we need to get serious about this. So that was all about kind of the first 2 goals. How do we get back to the top 10 in growth? How do we position every region to participate in that growth? By the way, I should have mentioned one of the things that we need to do to get every region to grow is we've got to market our rural communities. We're not spending anything on marketing in rural Virginia today. We need to invest in that. That would be a big part of our marketing budget if we happen to get one at some point in the future. We also need to do more with site development. We need to offer customized workforce solutions. There's a whole suite of things that we need to do to position rural Virginia to grow. Let me say just a little bit about our national rankings. This is a slide that kind of helps you get a sense of where we've been. In 2009, we were number 1 in 3 of the 5 major rankings. We've since fallen an average of about 7 spots. We're at number 9 on average now today. We did move up in CNBC this year back into the top 10, number 7. We were number 1 back in 2009, but we moved down in other rankings. So overall, we're averaging about number 9. In the perception-based rankings, we're outside the top 10 on all of those. So we've clearly fallen. We need to get back to the top. Our team has analyzed all these different business climate rankings. I've actually personally met with all of them multiple times in my previous work over the last decade, so I know them well. There's a lot of different things that go into them, but there are basically three big reasons why we fell. The biggest one is actually the middle one, economic growth. The slowdown in growth, the slowdown in expectations of growth caused us to fall. But in addition to that, our rankings for business costs got considerably worse the last few years. I don't think the costs themselves got worse. It was that new rankings came out that better reflected the real cost, particularly for expansions of existing companies as well as for new investment. I'll talk more about that in just a minute. And then finally, perceptions of CEOs have declined. Back when Virginia had a marketing budget, it was one of the things that contributed to corporate America being aware of all the incredible assets that are here. If you don't think a marketing budget matters, let me just give you one example. I took over the VDP of Louisiana, the Louisiana Department of Economic Development, back in January 2008. And that year, as we took office, Chief Executive Magazine ranked Louisiana number 47 in the country, best states for business. Virginia was ranked number 4. We were Louisiana 47, Virginia number 4. 7 years later, thanks to a very well spent $7 million per year marketing budget, Louisiana had gone from number 47 to number 7, a 40 spot improvement, while Virginia fell from number 4 to number 14 in the same period of time. I've lived in Louisiana many, many years. I love the state. I consider it my adopted home state. Louisiana should not rank ahead of the Commonwealth of Virginia in any business climate ranking. But what we were able to do was to tell the story of all the assets that we had. Meanwhile, Virginia basically went dark. We're sort of referred to as a quiet state. This marketing issue is a very big issue. So how do we get back to the top? There's three big things: policy improvements like lowering the tax burden for new manufacturers, programmatic initiatives like creating a turnkey workforce solution. This is a big missing piece from Virginia. We used to have it, but that was another thing we let go many years ago. And investing in marketing and branding, both for Virginia as a whole, for our top industry sectors, and then really highlighting the rural Virginia opportunity. All those things would help contribute to more growth in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Now, we work with the Virginia Chamber and Virginia Tech. We've identified many, many dozens and dozens of initiatives. There are basically 6 big ones that we think would make the biggest difference. The first is implementing the growth strategy I talked about already. Second is addressing our state and local tax burdens for new investment. Fortunately, through some work we've done, we think that the rankings that are out there actually have some flaws. I think GAO identified some of the same flaws. We think we'll be able to get those fixed. But even with the flaws being fixed, there's still a significant gap between kind of how we rank for existing business versus new business. So there's some targeted changes we think we can make there. Launching a customized workforce recruitment and training incentive program, addressing a few things in our legal climate, securing big economic development projects across the Commonwealth. One of the funny things, I've laughed at myself so many times this year when people have said that VDP only cares about whale hunting. Who's the last person that got a whale in their community? Anyone? Yeah. We haven't caught a lot of whales in Virginia the last few years. We don't think that's the whole strategy, but we do think it should be part of it. And then finally, investing in marketing to improve our perception. We ran these same ideas by the Business Climate Industry Council, the Chamber. Very strong support for all of them. A lot of interest on the tax burden piece and the details, but still 2/3 in favor. What this slide says, again, I apologize for the small font, but long story short, if we implement just those 6 things, we will get comfortably back to the top 5, and in most cases back to the top 3 over the next 5 to 7 years in the national rankings. Let me shift gears just a little bit. I want to share with you a little bit about our strategic planning process, then talk about Go Virginia localities, and then I'll turn it over. One of the big things that JLARC recommended and that the new code for VDP requires is that VDP go through a comprehensive strategic planning process. And we've been doing that this year. We've got input from so many groups. I won't go through all of them on the page, but hundreds and hundreds of economic development professionals through surveys, through meetings. We had a steering committees for different parts of it. We had a national expert panel. We had partners with the chamber, with rural stakeholders, with legislators, and so forth. We've gotten a lot of input. And this plan is almost done. We're going to be releasing it on December 1. Coming out of that plan, 5 key priorities for the next General Assembly session. One is funding that workforce initiative that I talked about. This is a partnership we're going to be announcing between VDP and BCCS that we think would create the best custom workforce program in the country. Second, implementing a robust marketing, branding, and site consulting cultivation program Third, expanding our site development efforts. Again, you remember I said that's a huge gap for Virginia. Fourth, expanding our trade development programs. We've got one of the best in the country, but it's heavily oversubscribed. And then finally, we're going to ask the General Assembly to fund some of the new unfunded mandates, if you will, that we got out of the GAO Report. So those are the big five for the coming session. I wanted to briefly mention in our work with localities, one of the things that I heard again and again early this year was a desire for more clarity about the prospect pipeline, more clarity about when a locality gets eliminated, why did it get eliminated, faster turnarounds on incentive offers, more transparency on the prospect pipeline, many, many things. A lot of folks said, hey, could we have a protocol that would better define how we do this work so that we know what to expect and so that VDP is kind of being held accountable to a standard? We said, absolutely. We are now on literally the 8th or 9th draft? 8th draft. And I think it'll be the final draft. We sent out to all of our key local and regional contacts a few weeks ago. Most of them said this looks great. A few of them said they had a few technical suggestions, and we're making those. We're going to publish that at the end of this month. That protocol will then be included in all the position descriptions and the performance evaluations of our staff. We're also going to survey our partners once a year to make sure that we're following. I think you're going to see a substantial improvement. The other thing we're going to be launching later this month is a new quarterly partner communications report. We'll have information about the prospect pipeline, key contacts at VDP, staff changes, major initiatives, and so forth. I think it will give all of our partners a much better sense of what's going on in economic development in Virginia than we've had before. Let me briefly talk about Go Virginia, and then I'll do JLARC and I'll be done. On Go Virginia, we looked at all the regional plans of Go Virginia and kind of compared that against what we came out with that I shared with you earlier. Big picture, there are a lot of similarities and themes in terms of the major sectors like IT and cyber, logistics and manufacturing. Very similar articulation of the top priorities in terms of enablers, broadband, human capital development, site readiness, innovation, and so forth. So we really feel like there's a lot of positive alignment between them. The other thing that we've been working to do is to kind of clarify how we're going to work together. It's actually relatively simple if you think about it. VDP is really the lead and kind of owns marketing, lead generation, incentives, business recruitment, business retention and expansion work, custom workforce solutions, trade development efforts. Go Virginia is really incentivizing and encouraging regional collaboration. They're also funding some of the product development efforts where we can identify there's a gap like site development, but we really don't have money to address the gap. So our hope is that they're going to address those things. There's a few things we're going to be working on together, like site intelligence and development, like cluster development, and also development and design delivery of human capital development strategies. I just wanted to briefly mention, you've heard about the JLARC report a year ago. I believe Hal Greer, the head of JLARC, said it was the worst performance audit he had seen in his career. So as you might imagine, this has been my top priority this year, addressing all these issues. What you're looking on the slide, there are 27 JLARC recommendations that relate to the VDP can control itself versus things the General Assembly would do. I don't know if you can read it from where you're sitting, but about the third column over is the percent complete. On average, we're about 80% done. We expect by the end of the year, we'll be at about 95%, and we'll just have a handful of things left to do. I gave an update that was well received today with the JLARC Commission this morning on all of our progress. Got a lot of nice comments back. By the way, the green items are all the things we fully agree with. The yellow ones we agree in spirit, but there were a couple little tweaks that we wanted to make a little different than JLARC's recommendation. But overall, we've taken this very seriously, and we're not quite done, but we're the vast majority of the way to being done. We're going to end up in a good place at the end of the year. With that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, and I think we're taking questions after that. Let me just say while he's coming up, we really want to be great partners for our localities, so I'd love to, I'm planning to try to participate in VACO events regularly. We're also going to bring back the either quarterly or twice per year meetings with our local EDOs as a group, probably connected to the VEDA conferences. So be looking for that going forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Great job. And welcome to Virginia. And I think you all really should appreciate the fact that Virginia did a great job of bringing Stephen here. We're very lucky to have him. And I believed that just from understanding a little bit about Stephen's background, and after seeing this presentation, I know we got the right guy here. So Good to have you here. I'm going to talk a little bit today about some of the same things that Stephen talked about, but I want to talk about it more from the perspective of what you all can do in your roles as local government leaders. Because I really believe that you play a very significant part in his success. When you win, all of us win. And let me see if I can find the clicker. Thank you. So today, and let me just mention a little bit of background. I was in Chesterfield County for a long time, as you heard, 9 years as county administrator. I had the privilege of being appointed to the county administrator position 3 months before 4 of my 5 board members got voted out of office. And a year before we went into the worst recession in our lifetimes. And you heard a little bit about what happened in Northern Virginia and what happened in many other parts of the state. And many of you live in those areas that really suffered through that recession. And interestingly, if you listened to a lot of the economists and all who were looking at the state, one of the things that befuddled them as we went through that recession was that Richmond seemed to do better than the rest of the state. And if you looked a little bit deeper into Richmond, you would have seen that it was Chesterfield that was carrying Richmond. And I don't take a bit of credit for that, although I was county administrator. But the truth is, one of the things I want to share with you is a little bit of information about my economic development hero. So it's sometime in 2008 or 2009, and all of us as local government officials are wringing our hands and wondering what in the heck are we going to do? Real estate assessments are falling through the floor, the state doesn't have any money, but our workload's increasing. You know, we still have kids in school, we've got to educate and all these things. What are we going to do? So, and I work with some great people in economic development, by the way. Will Davis, who was our economic development director at the time, until Stephen got here, I think Will was probably the best economic development person in the Commonwealth. Our governor, they're working with the governor. I mean, this guy is just amazing. I don't know anybody else that you could get out of a shuttle in Beijing and have some guy across the street say, "Hey, Governor McCullough, what are you doing in Beijing?" And he turns around and goes, "Oh, hi, so-and-so." He knew these people. And not only that, but you could go to lunch the next day and your Chinese host keep pouring this Chinese version of white lightning. And we have a governor who can make that stuff go away somehow and still end up doing a great deal. So good economic developers, but my economic development hero is Bob Schrum. You might say, who the heck is Bob Schrum? So somewhere back there in end of 08 or early 09, Bob Schrum, who's a local business guy, runs a couple of car washes in Chesterfield County, calls me up and says, "Jay, let's go to lunch." And I'd known Bob for 25 years and had a good relationship with him, even though he was one of those local guys, and I'm sure some of you know these guys who are kind of gadflies. They often come to board meetings and question what you're doing and so on and so forth. So he's going to take me to lunch. We're talking, and I'm telling him about all of the trouble and how tough it is being a county administrator. And Bob Schrum says to me, "Well, Jay, just don't participate." I said, "Bob, what do you mean don't participate?" He said, "In the recession. Don't participate in the recession." Don't participate in the recession. And he laughs, and so it was a good laugh. But I left that meeting with Bob, and I went home that night and I thought about that. And I thought about something I don't know if it's still on there. Anybody still read Kiplinger's letter? They used to always have a little saying at the top. It said, "Every time is a good time, as long as you know what to do with it." And I thought about that, and I started to think, well, maybe Bob's right. Maybe Bob is right. Why are we even participating in the recession. So just kind of keep that in mind. That's my economic development hero. And it is because you need to be thinking about the future of your communities. Where is your community going? You know, you heard a little bit from Stephen. You know, if you're not growing and thriving, you're probably dying. You know, how many people know of a community that looks exactly the same today as it did 25 or 30 years ago? Where do you want your community to be in 25 or 30 years? And I would suggest to you that you need to have, if you're a local government leader, it's your responsibility to create a vision for your community, but not just a vision. You need a vision that's going to inspire people. So you didn't hear Stephen say, you know, we want to be pretty good at economic development. And in Chesterfield, one of our mottos for many years was, we want to be the first choice community. We want to be the place that people think about as a place to work, as a place to play, a place to raise a family, a place to start and develop a business. The place. The first choice. Not the second choice or the third choice, the first choice. And then there's a lot that goes around that. So in 08 or 09, I'm looking at our vision and I'm thinking, you know, we're going to add something to that vision. We sit down with our team and we go, we're not going to participate in the recession. Because somewhere out there in America, there is somebody who is optimistic no matter how bad it is, and they're going to be looking for the place to put their business. And when they start looking, we're going to make sure that our community is on their list. So what is it about your community? What's your vision for your community? Very important first step that you need to develop as a leader. What's the role of economic development in that vision? You know, one of the things about a suburban county like Chesterfield is you're going to get a certain amount of residential growth. Is that good enough? You know, you build a bunch of houses, you have a bunch of kids, they fill up your schools, your tax rate goes up. So why is economic development important? Well, because I want to be able to start exporting tax liability, and the way I do that is by growing business and growing employment in my locality. So what's the role of economic development in your vision for your future? And then what are the goals of economic? Is it to create jobs? Is it to grow the tax base? Is it to help your local businesses thrive? What are your goals and how are you going to measure that? If you don't have goals, and I would encourage you to get some goals that for your locality are big, hairy goals, not the easy stuff that you know you're going to get. Even though it's risky to say, like I remember going to Will Davis and saying, our goal is going to be $300 million a year. He's like, what? But that's what we needed to balance our tax base as we were growing. We needed that kind of investment. What are your goals around economic development for your community, and how are you going to measure them? Because if you're not setting goals and measuring, you're just practicing. It doesn't really count. So another question for you. In your community, where are you going to find the prospects? Who are you going to help you achieve your economic development goals? Is it going to be growing existing businesses? And it's not about whales. I mean, whales are great. You know, you love to land a whale. But a lot of jobs today come from growth of existing businesses. And what are you going to do to help make sure that your environment is right for those existing businesses to grow? Are you going to encourage startups? Are you going to recruit new businesses? And what kind of new businesses are you going to recruit? Are you looking for tourism? Are you looking for data centers? Are you looking for manufacturing, headquarters? What fits in your community? Logistics, biomedical, agritourism. I think we've got some Virginia localities that could do really good in agritourism. mean, there's got to be a lot of people around the world that want to come to the Trump winery, I guess. I don't know. Is that right?
Yes.
So, but get clear on what your goals are. And then you have to have product. What's your product? In today's world, if somebody comes looking for a location for a new business, or if one of your local businesses want to expand, the worst thing you could possibly do for that business is tie them up in 2 years of zoning process. Or say to them, yeah, we have a plan to get water to that site one day. You need to have the product ready to go. Because time is money, and in today's world, that is so much more true than it's ever been in the past. People are looking for things to happen and happen fast. So you need to identify sites, you need to have zoning in place. You need to look at the infrastructure. You want to have the water lines available. What kind of resources do you have in your community? Okay, so let's think about that. Do you live in a community that has an unusual access to stable power grid? That would be a wonderful asset to have in today's world. Do you have broadband? How about transportation? What else? Raw materials, gas supply, natural gas. Great thing to have right now is a good natural gas supply. What is it that you have as a community that you can offer? And finally, and I kind of put this one out there separately because I don't know what you all hear, but if I've heard it once, I've heard it 100 times in the last year, talking to business people all around the region. I've got jobs that I can't fill. So ask yourself, what are we doing as a community to make sure that we're creating and attracting the kind of labor force that would make a business person who can't find people to fill the jobs he has excited about coming to your community? Why would somebody want to move to your locality? Why would a young person who you just spent $5 or $7 or $8 or $10,000 a year educating, why would that young person want to stay in your community and not run off to Denver or Seattle or Boston or Austin? And just a little side story on that. While I was county administrator, I would run off once a year with the Chamber of Commerce to visit some locality and find out how come they're doing better than we are. And I was in Denver a few years ago. Denver's doing great. They do a lot of things right. I always made a point when I was on those trips of trying to get with some of the locals and talk to them about how they viewed their community. Because, if you go out to Denver with the Richmond Chamber of Commerce, you meet with the Denver Chamber of Commerce. They're not giving you the bad news. They're telling you everything they're doing right. So I'd always kind of go out of my way. So I'm sitting down with this guy who happened to be in the Denver Chamber, and I'm talking to him about how they do things in Denver, and asked him about this phenomena that Denver was, always close to the top of the list of where millennial kids graduating from college want to go. And his comment to me was really interesting. He goes, yeah, we're really good at that. We have to be, because our public schools are terrible. And I thought, isn't that interesting? So Virginia, we've got a great education system, and I know so many kids who've come through that education system. We do a fantastic job of educating them, and they're running off to Denver to go to work. Now, why is that? And we need to figure that out. You need to figure that out for your community. What's going on there? And so some of the things, and this is why I think this is worth talking about a little bit. What are some of the things that young people are looking for in today's world? An active lifestyle. a vibrant nightlife, a food scene. You know, those little, you can go to like a little town, but I know it's in Northern Virginia, but a little town like Clifton, and they have a real trendy little restaurant down there in Clifton. Not much else there, train station or something. But things like that matter. High-speed data. Don't be looking for young people if you don't have access to high-speed data. So what is it about your community that's going to attract the people that the companies are looking for? An alignment. You just heard a really good presentation about where VEDP is trying to lead the Commonwealth of Virginia. As local government officials, you have a responsibility to understand that plan, and I know it's a lot to digest, but take some time to think about it, and ask yourself, how is our plan going to interface us as a locality with our region, and as a locality and as a region with the Commonwealth's plan? How do we link those two together? This will help you because these guys, they want to succeed and you want to succeed. You've got something in common, so let's be working together to get this thing done. Now I want to go back to Bob Schrum for a minute. I went home that night, started thinking about what he had said to me, and a couple weeks later, I went back and I got with him after getting with my team and saying, how are we going to not participate in the recession? So I went back to lunch with Bob and I said, Bob, I've been thinking about what you said. He goes, what do you mean, Jay? I said, well, we're not going to participate in the recession. He goes, Jay, I was only joking. I said, yeah, but I was thinking about this thing I saw in Kiplinger that says every time is a good time as long as you know what to do with it. I think we know what to do with it. So at the time, back in the 90s, Chesterfield had arranged for one of those large sites that we don't have enough of in Virginia. And we had invested some in the site. We had utilities there, but we were missing a critical piece of that site. And that was really good quality transportation access. Now, a number of years earlier, Bob and I had worked together on a little deal to reduce B-pole taxes. And the deal we made was we would freeze revenue from B-pole, and every time we grew the economy, we'd take the additional B-pole revenue and use it to reduce the rate. So now we're in a recession, and we don't want to participate in the recession. We want to do something different, but I need to get an interchange built. So I go to Bob and I present the case, why don't we work together to get that interchange built? And we laid out the case, talked about it. The deal was, we're going to let B-pole revenue grow again, but we're going to use that additional revenue to build an interchange. And Bob, I need your help. And this was sacrilegious to Bob. But I got to give him credit for being an open-minded guy. And he said, "Do you really think that'll work?" I said, "Bob, I think this will work. Hey, we've got to do something. We're not participating in the recession." And so we worked together. We got the business community engaged. We sold that concept. We went to the governor. We got the Commonwealth on board. We went to our representative in Washington, Randy Forbes, and our senators, and we got them on board. We built an interchange. People thought we were kind of nuts. And about the time we got going on that interchange, Amazon comes looking for a site. And it's an interesting story, of course. They're, 6-8 months late making a decision. They should have made the decision in July. They made it in December. And they wanted to be shipping product out of that site before the end of the year. And I can tell you, the other day I ran into somebody in Chesterfield County who was complaining about Amazon because it's traffic and they don't pay that much. I will tell you that for me, that was one of the proudest things for me in my career in Chesterfield County, because that October, 2,500 people who were unemployed went to work for Christmas. 2,500 Christmas presents to families that wouldn't have had jobs if Amazon hadn't come. And that's why Bob Shrunk is my economic development hero. And there's a lesson in there, I think, for all of us. You need to differentiate yourselves through a commitment to be the absolute best community that you can be. Don't be settling for second or third. Not everyone is going to win the World Series, but you need to be trying to get there. Very important lesson. Set big goals, go for it, try to be the best you can possibly be. Another thing, play as a team. If we didn't in Chesterfield County pull everybody together, VEDP, our business community, everyone on our staff. Economic development is a team sport. You don't need to have your fire department walk in and put up a roadblock for a new industry because they're not familiar with how fire protection is handled in that industry. Every single person on your staff ought to understand how their job relates to the economic development in your community. And then you as leaders need to be prepared to work with VEDP, with your representatives in the General Assembly, with your business community, and with your citizens. Because a lot of times citizens don't really get it. You know, all they know is they want lower taxes and more services. And they may not understand, if you're not out there with that inspiring vision talking to them, why economic development helps you get them where they want to be. But it is a team sport. You all need to come together. And then delight the customer. And it's not just getting to, we have a deal with Amazon. Amazon was 6 months late making their decision. It was up to us to make sure that Chesterfield County didn't get in the way of them making somebody's Christmas a good Christmas the next year. And if that meant we had to put a trailer on their site and put building inspectors and fire inspectors in the trailer to make sure that that project stayed on board, or that we had to bend our rules and change our processes to keep them going and keep that project on schedule. And it was an amazing thing. I can tell you, they were shipping it. The building is probably close to half a mile long, you know. It's 1 million square feet. They're shipping product out of one end and it's still raining in the other end, but they were shipping product. But you have to make that happen after the fact. You need to make sure that those businesses become a part of your community. Because Amazon continues to grow and add. You know, other companies that came in to your locality, they're going to grow. And you need to keep treating them right. It's like service after the sale. Don't drop them. Okay, we got a deal, they're coming. Don't drop them. Make sure they feel a part of your community and they know every day how much you appreciate their being there. I think, you know, there's some obvious things. Don't do anything illegal. Don't do anything immoral. And don't do anything that's not in the best interest of your community. But aside from that, be willing to do it all. And with that, anybody know what those things are? Bugs. Probably the most interesting project I worked on was a Chinese project. And by golly, when they put these critters on the plate, and we're this close to doing that deal, I learned to love Cicada. So do what you have to do, go out there and make your communities great, and let's get Virginia back up in that top 5. Thank you all.
Thank you, Jay. Interesting story before we get to questions. Jay was talking about Amazon. We have, I was appointed to the board in May of the year that Jay was talking about. And at that time, our economic development person told us, we've got this big secret client out there. We can't tell you anything about it. And so I was new to everything. And so by September, October, we found out it was Amazon. And of course, I won't take any credit for Amazon coming to Dinwiddie. We've got an Amazon distribution center in Dinwiddie too. But I was on the board of supervisors when it came to Dinwiddie. So we'll go ahead and open up for questions now. So if you raise your hand, we've got time for a fair amount of questions. So yes, ma'am.
Thank you both. During the time when we fell out of the top 10 rankings, for example, did the cutbacks in state investment in transportation and in public education have anything to do with that perception from the outside that we were falling apart?
That's a great question. I don't know for sure because they don't measure it quite that way. Sorry.
We didn't hear
Repeat the question. The question was, when we were falling out of the rankings, was the state's, the decline in funding for education and transportation, was that a contributor to that? And I said, I don't know, to be candid, because it's not measured quite that way. But what I do know, of course, is that substantially all the states reduced funding for higher education during the recession. Virginia was one of those for sure. So it should have impacted everybody to some extent. Transportation, I'm not close enough to the dollars to know what that comparison impacted.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Jay, more so than our other panelists here, but either of you, I'd be interested in your thoughts. But one of the inner city visits that I was recently on was to go up to Pittsburgh, and there was a lot of talk about these bold leadership decisions that, make controversial investments in big money infrastructure projects like ballparks and so forth, that it really creates just this massive amount of debt. And I was wondering if each of you could speak to that, because we do as localities sometimes get a lot of questions and heartache because, well, we want the big shiny objects like ballparks and sports stadiums. What do you see the public role in, and where do you kind of draw that line on the risk reward for these big bold decisions?
That's a great question.
Yeah, so the question was big, bold decisions like stadiums for baseball teams. And there's a lot of people who have a lot of different opinions about those kinds of things. And I do think that, there's people in some localities that would say their investments in the stadiums paid off for those localities. I've never seen a rigorous, unbiased study of investment in professional sports that would convince me that it pays for itself. On the other hand, and I think it's very possible there was a time when it did. But you have to look at your particular environment and assess your particular environment. Every environment is different. We've looked at those things in the Richmond region for a long time, and it's kind of hard on the professional sports level to compete with DC. And we're close there, but in our case, we looked at that and we decided that the real money is in amateur sports. And so we invested in the premier flat field synthetic turf complex in the state. and that's now the leading sports tourism draw in Central Virginia, and it has way more than paid for itself. So I think the smart thing to do is to look at every particular situation on its own merits and make your best judgment as to where you'd like to make your investments. And beyond that, I don't work for government anymore. But I never did fully understand the idea of subsidizing millionaires and billionaires with a lot of tax money. But certainly for some community, maybe if you're St. Louis or LA, it makes good sense. So I'm not saying it doesn't make sense in every case, but I think you got to look at it really hard in your particular situation.
Yeah, I would agree with Jay. I would just add that I do think that, going back to Jay's point about thinking big in the goals, that the critical thing, and I think you touched on this as well, is making sure, and this is one of the points that I made or tried to make, I don't know if it was clear, but is that if we want to achieve those goals, there are things you have to do to get those outcomes. I mean, there were years in Virginia's past, at least in Northern Virginia, maybe in Hampton Roads, where the federal government activity was enough to create lots of great outcomes, but those outcomes weren't necessarily shared across the Commonwealth. And so one of the big points that I'm making to the General Assembly leaders, and really even to y'all's localities, is if you really want to win big, make sure you know what it takes to win big and that you're willing to do it.
Yes.
Steve, you've talked about rural Virginia and how important rural Virginia is to the economic development for the Commonwealth as a whole. As a rural development supervisor, how do you feel we can best attract jobs? And are we looking at the employers, not the Amazons obviously, because they're finding their way into Dinwiddie and Chesterfield, but is it better for us to focus on those 30, 50, 100 type jobs and really start building and perhaps finding niches that we can have employers grow off of each other? Can you address that at all?
No, it's a great question. I mean, I think the first thing I would say, and this may be a little unfair, but I think when you look at Virginia writ large, that this is a state whose kind of policies and programs are to some extent biased toward the bigger metro areas and sort of urban Virginia, if you will. And you can see that in that when you look at those past growth disparities that I showed earlier, I think in some ways that it's kind of easy if you're at the state level to say, well, hey, the overall unemployment looks good, the overall growth looks good. But then if you really disaggregate and look at the different regions, you realize there are these huge disparities. So I didn't have the chart up here today, but I think one thing that's really important for us to understand as a state, as a Commonwealth, as we think about rural growth, is just the challenges that rural communities are facing nationwide, right? That in general, there are not enough economic activities in America that want to be in rural regions for most of rural America to grow, or even for a substantial minority of it to grow. But what I believe is, when I look at this place, when I look at Virginia, what I've seen, the stunning beauty, the incredible human assets, our education assets, we could be one of a small number of states that could choose, that could literally make a choice that we're going to position rural Virginia to grow. But part of that is we have to decide that we're going to do the things that we need to do to help rural Virginia to grow. As an example, I mean, by the way, on your core question about smaller projects versus bigger, I think we should definitely do both. I definitely think they both have a role to play. But there's no question, I know from many years of working on economic development projects, there are still medium and large size projects to be had. It's just that Virginia hasn't been very competitive for those. We haven't had the incentives, we haven't had the workforce solutions, we haven't had the sites. And those are basically the big three. The fourth one is we haven't had the visibility. We want to address all four of those things. We got a group of rural stakeholders together, as I mentioned earlier, and I'm going to give you roughly their top five. Tied for number one was marketing rural Virginia, which we spend 0 on today. We also spend 0 marketing Virginia as a whole, but we need to also market rural Virginia. Tied for number one was expanding broadband access. I do believe it has a meaningful impact. I realize we have broadband largely for businesses, but it's a huge quality of life thing that I think makes it hard to attract and keep folks in rural areas, particularly younger professionals. Let's see, marketing. We also talked about incentives for high caliber competitive projects. Virginia very often, in fact just recently, got eliminated for two big projects. One because we didn't have a site ready to go, another one because we didn't have a competitive incentive. Both of those things we need to do a better job of addressing for rural regions. What I didn't put on the presentation today is that we've looked at every region of Virginia and what the forecasts are. We've got about 7 of our regions that are forecast to lose jobs over the next 10 years. But when you look at the gap, it's not huge. I mean, a couple hundred extra jobs a year in each region, in most cases, is enough to go from negative to positive. So we're not talking about, it may seem like a huge challenge collectively, but it's really just 2 or 3 significant additional project wins every year in every region. And so what we're really focused on is how can we partner with our localities, partner with our regional groups, how can we position our rural regions to get those additional wins and to be competitive, to be able to grow. Easier said than done, I agree with you, but I really do think a starting place is saying we're going to measure success not just for Virginia as a whole, we're going to measure success at the regional level. Thank you.
Got time for one more question if we've got one. Yes, sir.
I've got a question. What is the Tobacco Commission? They've had a lot of money. In your judgment, what are the things they've done right and what are the things they've done wrong?
The question is, in the Tobacco Commission's history, what are the things that they've done right and they've done wrong? I guess for better or for worse, I'm new to Virginia, so I can't comment on that other than to say I've had a great partnership with them since I started back in January with Evan Feynman. They've been super responsive. In fact, some of the things that we're doing at VDP, we're trying to learn from some things, in some areas at least, the Tobacco Commission has done better in terms of being able to move quickly and be responsive for new companies. They've also invested in lead generation and so forth. So I see a lot of things they're doing right. What I don't know is, the full history of all the things they've done previously. What we're working on with them is, are there places that we can collaborate to attract really transformational projects? In fact, my next appointment after this is working on one of those. But also for the other parts of Virginia, there are other entities that can also pitch in, foundations, universities, other groups. So sorry, I don't think I can answer your question directly. I just don't have enough history on the Tobacco Commission. But they've been a good partner to me.
All right, if we could give our 2 speakers a hand.